All right, you're very welcome back. Now, I've been looking forward to this piece for a while because it's a great day for the parish. It's officially the first book that's been written by a full-time member of the OTB staff. So congratulations to Arthur James O'D.
All right, I didn't realise that.
You gave birth.
Yeah.
And this is your beautiful baby. It's a biography in 9 lives, Limerick. And so you got the book out. Well done.
Thanks. Yeah,
what was that
nice.
like? A nice, easy experience to barely took anything out of you?
Oh, doing it or when it's coming out?
Both, yeah.
In hindsight, it doesn't seem that bad. You know, that kind of way. And you're like, but it's funny.
They call it oxytocin, I think.
Okay, it's like, well, I'm talking to my partner Eric about this as well. She's like, no, it was bad.
Yeah.
It was tough.
Yeah.
You're not remembering that as it was, but straight away when you're almost finished, you're like, what could you do next?
Yeah.
What's up next? So you don't, yeah.
Well, now you got to tell everybody how great this book is. Malachy Clerkin said it was the GA book of the year so far. I haven't read all the rest of the GA books. Malachy probably has, but it's brilliant. It's definitely, like, anybody who has any interest in sport should get it. Anybody who's any interest in the evolution of a great team or a kind of potted history of Limerick life all the way back to the Mick Mackey era. I can't recommend it enough, and obviously I'm biased, but take that as you will. So the first thing that strikes me is that it's an intensely personal book, even though it's a book about Limerick hurling, and you're a Sligo man, as far as we were all concerned, really. So what's that? What's that all about?
Well, I mean, yeah, you can be many things, I suppose. I'm a Sligo man as far as I'm from Sligo, but my father has kind of laid out, and centralish role he plays is obviously from Limerick. And I mean, Limerick hurling, for as long as I remember, has been central to our lives, our relationship, activities we do together, kind of centre around that, talking points. It all kind of eventually comes back to that, and everything's seen through that prism. So that's, yeah, so far as we're from, and I mean, he's lived in Sligo a lot longer than he lived in Limerick. I mean, but he's still from Limerick and of Limerick, and that ends up getting passed along. Because I suppose there's difference, and if you're specifically looking at GA, there's a difference between Sligo football and Limerick hurling. You know, I mean, even for quite a long time, success, not necessarily in terms of success, but Limerick, just by virtue of where they are and the structure of the hurling world, are far more central and pivotal to it. And it's always just, there's always been such an allure to it. Because as well, also to the point that there's such, in that weird way, that it's such a, you don't want to over egg it by saying a tragic history, but like a history of heartache, and there's something in that to latch onto.
Yeah, they were the Mayo of hurling, really. Like, they were the closest thing to it.
Yeah, like, I mean,
it's the 70s.
In a certain regard, yeah, for sure. I mean, it is that surrounded almost by teams and constantly bumping into teams who achieve a lot more than you, and it's, I think that
and who don't really seem all that better than you, if better than you at all.
No, and there's no reason for it either. It's not like, there are reasons, but there's no obvious reason. It's not like the same reason why Sligo, for instance, aren't getting upset about the success of Galway at an All-Ireland level or whatever, because it's not comparable.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, you understand it in that way, but with Limerick it's like, but there's no reason Limerick can't be as good as Tipperary or as Cork or as, even Clare. It's like, it's that kind of thing. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. So it's kind of almost, it's man-made destruction.
Now, we're obviously having this conversation in the middle of, or certainly at the peak of, or close to the peak of, Limerick ascending to the throne and now rivaling the great Kilkenny team to be considered the greatest team of all time. So the book is kind of an explainer of how we got there in some parts, but it's also laying out the difference between now and what the last 70 odd years have been like, really, since Mick Mackey bestrode the game like a colossus.
I mean, yeah, but I think firmly in my mind, like, you think of those conversations that you have, and you're talking about hurling, it's kind of, the last few years have enabled that. So the last few years, I think, make it a lot easier to talk about what's come before.
The pain.
I'm cautious of kind of overdoing it, because it's kind of difficult in one way, certainly from my perspective, to think about the pain or that when you never knew beforehand what success was like anyway. And so it's kind of, maybe I imagine actually now that if Limerick were, say, to go to next year's final and lose it, it would arguably be a bit more disappointing than it was in 2007 losing to Kilkenny. It's an odd way. It's like I appreciate that there's a difference because you're like, God, this would be great if this was over, but it's almost what makes sense and what you're familiar with and what you know, and now you know what winning's like, and you know what it, like, I suppose, to look at it, what it takes, and for that not to happen would be quite disheartening. But ultimately I think winning helps you then process what came before.
Well, it's explained somehow, or maybe it's not explained, it's rationalised that, like, okay, I'm struggling to put that in context, but I think certainly what comes across, what the book ends up being is this kind of like long journey to this point of greatness, and I actually do think they're all connected in a way that, like, I'm not sure it was your intention. We were just talking about this off air, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it does seem to me as if, like, being great sporadically has given everybody in Limerick this taste of what it could be. That sense that they had of, like, being very close to the top table, why shouldn't it be us, actually provoked some very strong-minded, strong-willed people into getting together to achieve greatness. But you can't do that in a county that hasn't at some point had a Mick Mackey or the team from the 70s, or the devastation of defeat to Offaly in the All-Ireland final. Because it would be ludicrous if people set up the Limerick Academy going, we're going to win All Ireland, in any other county that didn't have that. You can't do that, I don't think, in counties that have been starved of success, like the Antrim Hurlers, for example, or the Kildare footballers. They're coming from a different base, and it's less realistic for them to aspire to those things. Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know. I mean, yeah. I mean, there's certain. I suppose there's certain issues you can't overcome, however well planned you are. Like you can't. If you bring everything back to Sligo's, like, the playing base is so low. Like, say for Sligo's hurlers, who've made enormous strides the last few years and did incredible work, and it was a similar sort of thing where it was just a few strong-willed individuals who kind of drove things, and then eventually people started following in the wake. But ultimately, there's only, you know, a handful of senior clubs in Sligo hurling, so it's not, you're never going to get there. I appreciate that, but I don't think at the same time in Limerick that the intention, in a weird way, like, certainly from talking to Shane Fitzgibbon, who features in the book and who was instrumental in putting into place what would become the academy and kick on. I mean, they stressed that wasn't what it's about. It really wasn't about winning an All Ireland. It wasn't about that. It was kind of about, I suppose, like, in a sense, because you're putting yourself in a place where you can do it.
Yeah,
right? But it's not an end goal in and of itself.
No, because, and I already spoke earlier on the show about that moment where they get all of the coaches of all of the representative teams from the lowest age to the senior team, and John Allen is in the room, and the question is asked, who has winning the championship as their goal, and almost everybody puts their hands up. Like, I think the whole point of Fitzgibbon's thing is that, like, put the processes in place, and then we'll see what the results are, but we need to get the processes right, and once we do that, everything is going to follow. And, you know, I mean, I'm sure they didn't explicitly say we're all going to win All Irelands at the end of this, or we'll have a 3-in-a-row team, or a 4-in-a-row team, or a 7-in-a-row, who knows. They were like, well, let's get more quality inter-county hurlers to be available for selection. And
that takes, like, the fascinating thing, but it takes such a significant amount of humility, because none of those people, I mean, I know the money from doing the research for this, but beyond the county, say in terms of a national thing, well, we know the players, we know a lot of the key individuals in the background, almost nobody knows who those people were that started that off, and none of them really have any desire to be known. And it is that same sort of thing, you know, those kind of people who are there for personal sort of gain tend to get edged out, because it's not really what it's about. So it's a remarkable level of humility to go in and do that, because you are, I mean, you're genuinely just working for the greater good. Explain
what that is, to go in and do that. So Shane Fitzgibbon emerges as a hero of the book, kind of a reluctant hero in
extremely reluctant.
Yeah, in many respects. So him and a bunch of other people are inspired to get together and write the Raising the Treaty. Is that what it's called?
It's lifting the treaty. Yeah.
So what is that?
Well, it's essentially, so he stopped in 93. He hurled for Limerick, and I think he started in the 80s, stopped in 93, just before they get to the final in 94. And he kind of just had enough between work and commitment and everything else. It just wasn't worth it. And they were a barren few years, like, particularly. And I'm pretty sure, forgive me if I get this wrong, I'm pretty sure he's from Adair, and they set up a kind of essentially a mini academy there
on Sunday mornings.
Yeah, and kind of did those kind of basics and just got everyone.
So he went
in
back
and
to the
invested.
club.
Exactly.
Grassroots.
And what happened there was, in essence, the same thing then that was rolled out county-wide. Now, you kind of have to remember at the same time, like, while at that time, so that's the mid to late 2000s, Limerick Hurling, they've been to the final in 2007, but I think, like, Limerick won, like, it might be one or two Munster championship matches across the whole 2000s. So this was a pretty low ebb that they were coming in at, and I'm pretty sure they kind of benefited from the fact that it was like, well, whatever is being done is not working, and it's a very factional, it's spread out, and all. I suppose they came in with a clean slate and kind of brought this idea that you bring it all together and you have a centre point, you have a focal point, you have an overall aim that is everything kind of falls under Limerick. Not too dissimilar from what happens, or what I suppose would have happened with Irish rugby, in a similar sort of thing, that it is like a top-down almost programme where obviously all the work that's getting done at the clubs is the essential foundational work, but there's a bigger picture in mind the whole time. And that's kind of what he spearheaded, like the ins and outs of what are, I mean, in terms of just, I suppose, bringing people in, like different younger academy teams and setups where it's like players are brought in from a young age into a higher level of training. And I mean, from a practical, cultural level, what was so vital to them was just kind of creating a pride in what they were doing, where it was kind of like, and I think everyone who would have played, like, or kind of knows people who get into underage county teams when they're growing up, like there was that kind of feeling like it's great to get in and get the gear, and that's kind of it, because that's what you want, and then you want to be able to walk around with your Limerick tracksuit and whatever else, and that's kind of cool in and of itself. And they kind of undercut that and kind of went, that's not really what it's about, and if you're going to be here for that, that's not what you're not going to be here. And it's kind of just instilling some sort of feeling that there's something to be achieved here, that it's something to be proud of in and of itself, and that obviously just led on, like it keeps going. But it was down to just, you could say, almost stubborn, determined individuals who just, because it's strange, because there was absolutely no guarantee it would have happened. This is just people who kind of took it upon themselves to go and make something happen.
I think there's a few interesting bits along the way. He I don't know if it's only him, but certainly him and his like-minded people, they rally the troops of former legends from across the generations. There's one point you list off a load of names and I just can't find it now, but it's like literally people from the team in the 70s, the team in the 90s, the team in the 90s, and they're all like, yeah, we want in, we're going to help. While at the same time, they get the 4 divisional boards to agree to a shared plan, which, like, in anybody with any rudimentary understanding of the GAA understands that one committee is gung-ho against another committee for fear that somebody on one committee might get 2 rungs ahead of them in the great race to become the grand poobah down the road. And like, for a few individuals to be able to say, come together in a county that has been, difficult and certainly has its track record of strikes and fallouts and all that kind of stuff, to get them all to come together and say, we've got a vision, this is the vision, let's go for it, and then for them to do it, that's fairly remarkable.
Yeah, and I mean, there'd be a whole other book in that. I don't think the people involved would tell you enough that you want to know, because it is kind of now one of those things that's almost just become sort of myth and kind of but it just seems that for that brief moment they came with a plan that made sense and people listened, and it was just kind of, that's the way it kind of worked, and it took off.
There are a couple of other aspects to it too. They had access to the University of Limerick, and within UL there's like a really high functioning sports department where people are ambitious, and it has like the physical training, it has the academic side of the coaching and psychology and group dynamics, and it has the facilities.
Yeah.
And that's all like all in one place on their doorstep. That's fairly important.
It is. I suppose an important part of that though is that it's not necessarily on everyone's doorstep, and that's a potential stumbling block for that, because all of a sudden if you are a really kind of talented 12, 13-year-old who's coming into an underage Limerick setup where there might be, it'll be dozens of people there, say, for one of these sessions at the weekend or whatever, depending on where you're travelling from, to get back into UL near the city is like, that might not be the easiest thing to do for 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. And it is in that regard, like, that's, I think what's interesting with Shane, his outlook particularly, is that he behaved as if he didn't create this. He facilitated it, but something that almost started off from his perspective has kind of now, you could say, gone to a level that he himself is not necessarily comfortable with, where it is almost it's almost a professional thing. And I distinctly recall talking to Paul Brown, who was he got injured in 2018, but was part of that All-Ireland winning team, and he's now involved with that as a developmental officer. I'm not sure his exact title, but he was telling me before how essentially now the inter-county players were getting that sort of preparation and treatment and everything else, that like when they go back to their clubs, it's like you can't just throw these guys back in with guys who are just amateur in the truer sense of the word. Like, there's such physical differences there now, the capabilities of these players are so different that you know, without over-egging it again, like there's an element of danger there. If you get hit by someone who is that size and that, you know, who's working to that level, it could be a wrong thing. It's not like it's an endemic type of issue, but it does kind of stress that there's such a gulf now, and that is starting probably younger and younger, which in his eyes is not really what he wanted. Yeah,
you don't make any allowance for the late bloomers or the latecomers to the sport.
And even you could argue for a lot of people, like a lot of kids go through these things, but at the end of the day, there's going to be a 30-odd man panel at senior level. I mean, if you look at this Limerick team over the last number of years, like, granted, people have come and gone off the extended panel and stuff, but
not many.
First starting 15 is pretty much close to the starting 15 like 4 years down the line.
Now that's obviously a first world problem that many of the
I know, no, it's more, it's not like I'm not,
because they're all time greats.
They're not going to be pulling it down, but like it's an interesting side effect that I suppose you don't think about when your main concern, as in my thing, is from the top down. When you're looking at it the top down.
It has been incredibly successful. I found that very interesting because I think the Dubs did something fairly similar, and it'll be interesting. Like, obviously the GAA is copycat. Everybody wants to know what was going on.
Yeah,
you know, there's details in there that I'm sure will be parsed over by various county boards and managers and development officers and all that kind of stuff too. So let's go right back to the beginning, right? Because I do think that the legacy of Limerick hurling is hugely important, and giving them that whole sense of pride today, or 7, 9, 10 years ago when they started this whole thing, it was like, no, you can dream because we've done it before, and obviously Mick Mackey is at the start of that. How do you write about Mick Mackey at this remove? How do you go about finding something that's slightly different from Common or Garden, Mick Mackey's role in all this?
Well, like, I always kind of felt from the get-go that when you're picking 9 lives, it would look slightly odd for the sake of oddness not to have him as one of the 9. But by the same token, I kind of felt it'd be a touch facetious to talk about him as a hurler as such, because obviously there's no footage of any real use. You'd be relying exclusively on second, third hand accounts of what you're talking about. So you would, in a sense, just be regurgitating that. And I suppose particularly from my life, my perspective, Mackey's just he's an historical figure, an iconic figure, a sort of a godlike remove from everything else. And he's the man who the stand is named after. He's the man, you know, you look into, has a roundabout named after. He's the man who has a statue. He's the man who they sang songs about and wrote poems about. That folkloric figure. And my interest then was to kind of explore that, because that's ultimately what none of this Limerick team, none of the management saw Mick Mackey play. It's just not something you can countenance, but it lives on through, I suppose, word of mouth and through what has been created of that legacy. So my interest in that was, like, you have the statue of him that's down in Limerick, which was done by Seamus Connolly, who did also create a Paddy O'Shea statue and a few others. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I was fascinated by this. I was fascinated by, right, who's this guy? Because, like, it's not, as somebody was explaining, like, there's really not even a lot of images of Mick Mackey to work off. It's like, he's playing in the 30s and early 40s. There's not that much to work off. So who is this guy who went and created him and cast him in bronze for this thing? And talking to Anne Mulqueen, who was a sort of a renowned sean-nós singer, lives down now in Waterford, but actually, incredibly, because I didn't notice when I was getting in touch with her, grew up, her house was her house kind of, the back garden of her house backed onto, I think, the back garden of Mackey's parents' house in Limerick, and I think the Mackeys owned the house she was living in. So she's literally his neighbour and literally knew him growing up because he'd come home, obviously she'd see him, and she was a fantastic singer, and it was funny, she released an album I think in 1982 that was whatever All Ireland it was for Kerry.
Kerry's fifth, that was the one they didn't win.
Well, so maybe it was the one before the 25th they'd won or something, whatever it was.
I think it's in between the fourth and fifth in the book anyway.
So they had whatever Kerry's thing, but one of the songs she recorded on there was Mick Mackey and His Men. And I find that if you're approaching it through that and talking to these people, I suppose, about how they've approached Mackey and trying to almost, they're not myth makers, but they're solidifying it and they're giving it life and breathing life into it. And to talk to those people to try and get an understanding, I suppose, of
how they do justice
him.
to it.
Yeah, and it's like, it's almost like some of the, one of the best books I ever read was, I'm almost certain it was called Walt Whitman's America, and it was, I think, by a guy, David S. Reynolds. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure Walt Whitman's America. And while it was in a certain sense a traditional kind of biography, it also explored him through all the different sorts of, I suppose, as his fame as a poet and everything grew, through the different paraphernalia that comes up and through the different avenues and what he touches that then springs off into other things. And there's been good books. There's another good book about Bob Dylan. Sean something was the guy's name, who wrote a similar book, Bob Dylan's America. I don't know, was it off the similar idea, but that type of thing, exploring these kind of mythic, larger than life figures through, I suppose, what gets created by virtue of what makes them so extraordinary. And that for me was extremely interesting. And like, again, without sort of spoiling the things in there, I remember I was reading, I don't know where I was reading it, I feel like it was a reprint of Mackey's obituary. He died in the 80s, I'm not sure exactly what year, but I'm pretty sure the song that was played either during the funeral or when his coffin was lowered was Nearer My God to Thee. I'm pretty sure. Which obviously then brings straight into mind, for me, Titanic. Because in the film in 97, you're kind of, that's the James Cameron film, I think it's debated whether it happened in real life, but in the film, that's what they play as the ship's going down, the band, and whatever he says, that's the song they play. And you're overflowing with things like that. You're like, Titanic, Mick Mackey, and it's like, it was just all this kind of thing. You see all these things, but obviously no link there, but it's an interesting kind of thing of how you approach these people, because there's no point in trying to give a human portrayal of Mick Mackey. I don't know him, you'll never, but it was an interesting way to go about it, because that's, I think, where for most of us he lives and he exists. It's in those things that he is remembered through. And that's that to me is kind of fascinating, because we do that, we create that. And it's very, I suppose, from his time, it's not unique, but from his time he was already myth and icon and legend.
So sorry, that's a key point to point out here. When he was 28, 29, people were writing these songs about him.
Yeah. And like, I suppose it's a different time, so they didn't have, there
was no TV,
there's
so
no TV,
somebody had to sing a song about you.
You want to get these things down, but it's kind of, still, what does that do to a person? What does that do? And then you finish and you can't hurl anymore, and you spend your life then. And that's something that Éamonn Cregan, again, who was central to it, kind of talked to it, that he, again, whether it's apocryphal or true, but he had that thing that he heard that Mackey had said essentially when they won the All Ireland 73, God, that's a weight off my shoulders, like, and that was a 33-year wait.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, it's that sort of thing, but like, what that imagine, I don't know, say if Christy Ring, to take, I suppose, a slightly later contemporary of Mackey's, if he has to put up with that to the same degree.
Well, he doesn't, because obviously the next team comes along and he's kind of like, oh, you're part of that same, the lineal Cork hero.
Because that great team in the 70s comes, and...
But Barry Murphy is a natural successor in many ways, and we're not talking about quality, but just the public imagination. Cregan is a really interesting character. Not watching the games.
Yeah.
Like, and also, what does he really feel about, like, breaking the hearts of his county men when he can't watch the games now?
No.
What does he really feel about breaking the hearts of the county men in 5 minutes of madness? Like,
Look, who knows? I don't think he feels good about it. I don't think it's... And it should be pointed out, he's one of the people. I'm pretty sure he might have been the first person that Shane Fitzgibbon was on the phone to when he was getting things going. So he was... I mean, that's... Éamonn Cregan touches every aspect of Limerick hurling imaginable.
His dad played with Mick Mackey.
Yeah, won an All-Ireland with him, I think, in 33 or something, 33, 34, that type of time. What does he feel? I mean... He'd managed, obviously, a lot of those players because he'd managed Limerick prior to going to Offaly. He'd worked with a lot of them. He knew a lot of them. Obviously, he probably knew them all to some degree. And I mean, in his opinion, he expressly took the Offaly job because he didn't think it was likely that they'd meet Limerick. I mean,
he needed the same clause that the
Trump. Yeah.
It's like, look, if we're coming up against Limerick, we're going to step away. It's not big deal. It's never going to happen. Don't worry about it. But
he's an extremely interesting, captivating, complex individual because he's, and as you're saying, he doesn't watch the matches now. I'm not sure if he applies that to everything, but he's not watched any of the All-Ireland finals.
Just the Limerick games. We have to.
Sorry, you can't. Yeah. You just can't. He can't.
I presume he's consuming every other moment of available hurling, but
yeah, absolutely. But I just he can't, and I don't think.
You point out for nerves. That's like it's.
Absolutely pure anxiety. Yeah. Pure anxiety.
Go and wash the car or the wife's car or find a Western.
Anything else, and in some respects it's unfortunate and it's a sad thing. Because you can't, like, even now, like, what you like, it's so much bloody heartache though. It's so often beaten, little, and he's an All-Ireland winner and a star of that team and a star before then. But it's just the constant getting run down. But I don't think it's that rare a feeling. Now, I distinctly recall after having that conversation with Éamonn, calling my father and almost saying, "Would you believe this? Like, this is crazy." And he's like, "Oh yeah, no, I kind of get that." Now, and my father's not Éamonn Cregan. You know what I mean? It's not. He doesn't have the same skin in the game to this degree.
Should hasten to add that you and your dad don't speak after you lose, though. You're like, "Oh, we're comfortable now because there's nothing to say."
Well, I mean, we don't.
Those long trips from wherever you are in the country all the way back to Sligo. You're like, silence the whole way.
But it's a mutual shared silence. It's not. There's no antipathy to it. There's no anger there.
That's just a spectrum of like not being able to watch the game, not being able to talk about it afterwards. They're very closely related. You might not be able to see this, but I was reading that going, oh yeah, they're all. There's a lot of these people in this.
But it's supposed to hurt.
I know. That's why it matters.
That's exactly. That's why the highs are so high because it is absolute. It's agony. Now I don't know why he can't at this stage kind of. It's like enough's been done.
Well, I think you'd assume now that think the trouble is that they'll be going for all-time greatness and I can't watch that now.
I can't watch that, I'll leave it. And it's just, look,
next year's 4 in a row, right?
4 in a row.
Yeah, so he can watch that because that's only equal in Kilkenny. It's the 5 in a row one that he won't be able to watch.
It's remarkable, but look, I know from talking to him that the most, I suppose, important thing is that he does get enormous joy out of it. So it's not, I mean, he's not closed off, but it's incomparable joy in the same way that, I suppose it's something to talk about again and it's something positive and it's something, you go out and you meet people and obviously he'd probably have a lot of different friends of similar ages who'd have played for different counties and, that sort of jibes and everything like that. And, when you get to be on the right side of that, eventually it must be quite nice. And, he loves what's happening. But for the time being, the actual cut and thrust of it happening, he's not going to get involved in.
He is a really interesting character because you've gone back and found like match reports from when he was a kid winning matches in schools matches, which I suspect are the 60s, right? It must be the 60s.
Yeah, I think he came into the one in 73. I think he was, so he came in about he came into the Limerick panel, I think the mid to late 60s, I think. So yeah, I mean, he would have been young because he plays up till about 80. So he would have been out of school, I suppose, mid to 60s.
Manages Limerick, manages Offaly, goes on the Sunday game, gets attacked on the Sunday game by Ger Gilroy from a point of victory in the team hotel, which I had completely forgotten about, but Dennis Walsh was writing about it in in September. We're after listening to 10 minutes of a whinge there from Cregan. Says Loughnane the night he's won the All-Ireland. In fact, the Sunday game, he's already pissed off. Like, just won the All-Ireland. It's like, right. So speaking of the Sunday game, Shane Dowling ends up being the cover star for the book, which must be difficult to decide which of these people or how you're going to fit them in. But like, Dowling is kind of this funny link to the bad old days. Not necessarily the bad old days, but things weren't great. Like, I'd completely forgotten, or maybe didn't even know, there's an amazing post-match interview he gives after he gets back in the team. Like, is he 20? Is he 21 at that stage? And he's got this incredible, like, now, there seems to be some kind of weird antipathy towards him because he's, I don't know, has he missed a free or been dropped or played a bad game or something, and somebody shows him a message which is like from a message board. It's not a very kind thing to do, I think, but like, it obviously riled him up to the point where he then goes on, puts in a man of the match performance. But like, obviously at that stage the pundit in him is coming out, the ability to speak his mind as a kid who has had this mad responsibility thrust upon him and still delivered on the biggest stage. Like, he's kind of a forgotten man a little bit in the team at the moment because it's a team full of superstars, but they don't get there without the Shane Dowlings of the world.
No. And it's funny, at that moment, I was only talking to Nathan about that not too long ago, Nathan Murphy, and he was there. He was there at that time when that thing, and I think he sort of, I mean, with whatever degree of hindsight, he was like, oh, he'll be good. He'll be good when he finishes. Because it was that type of thing. Yeah, anyway. That's typical of everything that came before. That sort of backbiting and in-house fighting, and someone in Limerick said this about you, and whatever else about it. I don't. Again, I don't know what the truth is there, but sorry, something was said. I don't think Shane Dowling. I don't think you could describe him as anything like forgotten. And I appreciate what you're saying. I know what you're saying. Like, the team has gone on to strength in his absence, but I'd
say if you ask people outside Limerick, who are the key people in this Limerick team, they'd list off 5 or 6 lads, easily before they get to him, and that would be wrong. That I'm sure in Limerick no one's forgotten, and actually the fact that he's on telly as a member of the team is definitely going to help make sure that legacy isn't there. So maybe I misspoke, but that's the kind of context of what I was thinking. Yeah,
look, it's tough insofar as like, for anyone, I suppose, who doesn't know what happened, like, so he damages, I think in the end it's both knees, kind of get with ACL or cruciate, and that's him gone. In all essence, the last game he plays for Limerick is the 2019 semi-final against Kilkenny, where again he does the same thing, coming off the bench and nearly salvages it. But it's funny, like, we're talking about Mick Mackey, and so my grandfather, my father's father, was born in 1914, sorry. 1914 or 12. So his formative years watching Limerick are watching Mackey. Now, I mean, without too hyperbolic, from my viewing point, Shane Dowling's could be 2-3 years younger than me, but that's what he was to me watching. He was unbelievable, and it's that straddling of exactly why I feel he won't ever, there'll be no sort of, he'll be incapable of being overlooked, is because he straddles both. He is every Limerick fan watching. Now again, another generation will come that are like, I have a lot of cousins' children who are now kind of, this is their first experience, they're like 7 or 8 and they've been to 3 All-Ireland finals or whatever, and that's that's a different world altogether, and who knows what they'll think. But he was the perfect embodiment of both. So he comes in and whatever else, and he's another one of these highly touted youngsters who's coming in, and he hits the ground running. And what you're talking about there, I suppose, with the interview, he doesn't. I think it's John Allen who drops him in about 13, and he ends up coming back in 14, and then he's kind of ever present until 2018, when again he gets dropped by John Kiley. For whatever betterment, but he makes his impacts off the bench, and he's crucial. But I mean, we'll never know because we're not in there, and maybe I suppose when the autobiographies and memoirs and stuff come out, there'll be a greater light on this. But I can't help but suspect that he's just by speaking to him and by the way people speak about him, that he's a driving force in a similar sense to the way Keane Lynch is, but in a different way, that he is just a figure in the middle of all this who drives everything around him. And he does just have that, it's that odd thing where he's not that much older than the players around him, but is already from almost a different generation, because he's kind of come in just those few years before, gets the tail end of that, kind of coming in just after the strike. And Limerick's, they have a strong team. They get to an All-Ireland semi-final twice in a row, hammered out the door one day, and then get in within 2 points of Kilkenny to get to the final in 14, and then it's kind of into the abyss. And that should have been that's always what happened, because if you go back, and Limerick always get to about 1 or 2 finals a decade, and there for all intents and purposes, there were those 2, and we didn't get to the final. You know what I mean? That was their 2 chances. And if Limerick fall off into the abyss in 15 and 16, you think, well, that's it. That's another thing happening. And Shane Dowling, in a normal career, is plugging away for another 7, 8, 9 years, and whatever about it. But it's not what happens. And I feel that so maybe if he's not there, and maybe those players come through anyway, and Lynch and Hegarty and Gallan and all these guys come through. But I just feel he's the kind of tether between both. He knows what both worlds are like, and he keeps it. I just can't help but think he keeps the whole thing honest. And he's a realist. He's an extremely kind of down to earth, straight talking individual. And he's not happy with the role he has to play. This is a guy who by 20, so he's retired by 26, I'd say, maybe 26, 27 when he actually retires. But he's playing his last game, he's only about 25. He's still Limerick's top scorer in the championship. This guy, he's a phenomenon.
In history,
ever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And whatever about they have more games and stuff, but this guy, he's a phenomenon. And he's benched. It's kind of like he's not getting off the bench. Because, whatever about that, the way they want to play it doesn't work. But what it's a hard thing to contextualise, but what he did in the semi-finals and finals of 2018, and particularly the semi-final, is such a phenomenal act off the bench that it's still there with Quaid's save. It's the turning point. The whole thing turns on that. And that takes a very special individual to do that.
Can you explain why this makes you emotional?
No, I don't know, but it does. It gets me every time, especially that game, because that's where everything changed. If they'd won or lost in 2018 final, if they'd lost in the manner which it looked like they could have lost, that would have been an absolute disaster. But if they'd gone out toe to toe with Galway and Galway had won, I don't think that would have been the end anyway. I think they'd have come back. The same thing happened essentially the next year, and now look at them. They're not, they've barely lost a championship game of meaning since. So
they were 9 points up, and there was a precipitous collapse. Is that what happened in that game? That game we were talking?
No, I'm talking about the semi-final.
Semi-final against Cork.
In Cork, they were 6 points down with about 10 minutes to go.
Right, he comes off the bench.
He comes off the bench in about the 50, somewhere in the late 50s,
and that completely changes the game. Game goes to extra time.
Completely. In
the middle of that, there's Nicky Quaid's ridiculous save. That's
the best part when you're watching it back. I watched back those last 15 minutes and then into extra time so many times. It's phenomenal, and it's so many times.
This is what Eric is saying. This is very difficult.
But it's I'm pretty sure
time number 442.
It's Darragh Maloney and Michael Duignan on RTE, and it's astounding. So Limerick work back, and there's no goals. They work back from there might be some give or take, but it's essentially they get 6 unanswered points. And Dowling contributes a few. Gallan gets a free at the end, and literally the point that equalises. And we're talking about the 68, 69 minute here. The point that equalises, Gallan gets the point, and Nash launches it out, so up onto the top kind of left half corner forward, and I'm not sure whoever it was, but the ball comes across, albeit Harnedy or whoever else, and it's that moment that he literally, his hurl is still going backward, so it's not even coming back towards the ball, and Quaid's got in. And then I'm not sure whether more scored. I think Limerick might have scored again, and I'm pretty sure Horgan equalised for Cork, and we go to extra time, and then Dowling comes alive, and there's that amazing kind of thing. Easily the most enjoyable thing was it kills me when Dowling's running down towards the goal, and he gets pulled down, gets the penalty. And it was Paul Brown who told me, so Paul Brown was injured, so I'm pretty sure he'd done his cruciate and he was out for the year, but he was there at the semi-final, they'd kind of wrangle him in onto the bench as a water carrier or something. And he was out on the pitch as Dowling was about to take his penalty, talking, I'm pretty sure, to Declan Hannon. So that's, you kind of have sort of wherever Hannon would have been around the half-back line, Paul Brown there, and Mike Casey in behind them. And I'm pretty sure Brown says to Hannon, what's going to happen here? And Mike Casey says something along the lines of,
top right corner boy,
top right corner kid, or whatever else. And you're like, it happens. And you're like, that's it. And that's kind of the game. Because then obviously Pat Ryan comes in and gets, again, a stunning goal after that. And that really was the icing on the cake. But it was the day, of all the days around then, and obviously COVID knocked out 2 years that for attendances, it's the best by a mile. By any metric, it is by far the best. I think partially as well because it was Cork. Like, there's definitely a thing in that because it was Cork, and because they'd already beaten Kilkenny in the last round, and they'd beaten. I'm pretty sure they'd beaten Tip, and this was the last of those three that they had to take down in 1 year, which had never been done by Limerick anyway. You know what I mean? And it's astonishing because that was the moment. And then Dowling's centrality to all that. It'll bias my view of him.
Well, rightly so. You're entitled to that.
He was the game changer.
Yeah. It is obviously harder for Limerick because they have to beat Cork, Tip, and Kilkenny. If you're Cork, you just have to beat Tip and Kilkenny for it to be one of those years. We're like, oh, we just beat the ones because we always beat the other crowd.
Exactly.
That's that coming into being one of the big teams is like the journey is always harder, and the people who get you over that journey at the start are actually more important than the ones who sustain it, because they're the ones who had to climb the mountain first. And we underrate that when we're looking at this historically. It's like the team who makes the breakthrough, they had it hardest, irrespective of what comes afterwards. It's always the team who make the breakthrough that have it the hardest. So he's a central part of that, and so I can.
It's also worth noting that, like, I suppose, you know, there's an awful lot of players who play their part, but if you take particularly the semi-final and final, and the lads who went back, so Nicky Quaid came in during the strike as a midfielder. He has his seminal moment. I'm pretty sure Graham Mulcahy came in around the same time, gets his goal in the All-Ireland final. You've sort of Dowling and Hannon, who are kind of maybe the next year or two after those guys, and again so central to it all. And it is kind of those guys, and it's hard to know what you carry through, because Aaron Glan was brilliant, Keane Lynch was amazing, none of those guys had that same baggage, but those guys were, I just think, by virtue of the fact that if you were still in that Limerick team in 2018 and you'd come in when they came in, so many had dropped away or been cut away by that stage. And those guys are like, they were four. Like, there's more. There's not just them four, but they come to mind immediately. And they're just four guys who survived all that and came to that point. And that's remarkable staying power.
We haven't mentioned Tom Ryan. We've just mentioned the Quaids there briefly. Like, the Quaid stuff is sensational. And so you talk to
Breda,
who is the mother of Nicky Quaid.
Yeah.
And her husband was the goalkeeper who inherited the position from his cousin.
So Tommy Quaid was her Limerick goalkeeper from the late 70s through to about 92.
Okay.
Joe Quaid was his cousin,
who
then is famously in for 94, 96. So whatever that makes Nicky Quaid to think, cousin's child, cousin's son, I'm not sure what that is, a second cousin, whatever it is. That's the link though. But like, essentially a Quaid has been, and then obviously Tommy Quaid and Joe Quaid's father, who are brothers, both played for Limerick as well. So give or take from about the 50s onward, there's been a Quaid in or around the Limerick team.
It's in the genes, all right. But the heartbreak of a young father and husband dying the week of a match that is he the head coach? Is he the manager of the junior team who were playing at the weekend?
I don't know. Was he the manager? Involved in the manager?
Part of the
team,
coaching ticket.
Yeah. So
and his two sons go to the match while he dies in the hospital. It's like, it's just heartbreaking. And for that to be part of this story at the end as well, we always are like, sport brings together all these incredible stories, but it really does. Like, it is. It's and I'm deliberately not doing justice to this because I want everybody to go and read it in the book, but like her strength to go and become a coach and to do all the coaching classes and to be like, they're not going to miss out on a single thing, you know, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah. And the kind of, she was talking about the general assumption at the time that when Tommy died, and they'd moved to wherever they'd moved to, but the general assumption being that she'd now take the family kind of back to where she was from, Kilkenny.
Yeah. That would have been a different story.
Yeah, and she was
just,
Owen
Murphy in her life.
Yeah, but it was like, no, of course not. This is where they live. This is where they grow. And yeah, it's amazing that, like, because they weren't. I mean, they can only. They can't have been that old. They were only, I suppose, single digits, probably even the eldest. So I think Nicky's in the middle. And yes, and Tommy dies in 98. But from Breida's perspective, everything that was the things Tommy did day to day, in a GA sense, like everything being prepared and that sort of fastidiousness of a goalkeeper, particularly. You know, I think he stopped intercounty in 92, but he's still playing, and the fastidiousness and the careful preparation and everything like that, almost that army style military kind of precision with things like this was so embedded already in their lives, and she wanted that to keep going, and she wanted them to have the GA in their lives. Because I mean, because I didn't know anything about Breida's backstory before talking to her, you know, really. I knew bits, that nothing really. I think she'd done a piece with either Dermot Crowe or Dennis Walsh just around the 2018 All-Ireland. So that's where I was kind of introduced to her as an individual. But what's so fascinating to me was how interested she was in the G. She was a hurling fanatic. I mean, granted she was from Kilkenny, but a hurling fanatic from the very get-go. And that's why it was kind of like when she kind of speaks quite openly about, like, it's absolutely brilliant being married to an inter-county hurler. You get to go all the games, you're kind of in the middle of everything, in the thick of everything, all, you know, you get all the fun, all the crack attached with it. And I suppose it was just complete anathema to her to think that her sons
wouldn't have
if they were so inclined to it, wouldn't have that it would be just, you know. So I mean, yeah, and as you're saying, she goes, I mean, months after her husband had died, and goes and takes the sort of first basic coaching course out in Newcastle West somewhere, and so she can be involved, and so she can go and take part, and it's remarkable. Like it's like maybe it's not. Maybe it's just what you do, you know, if you're a certain way inclined. But I can't. It's just to go and do that next step, and to kind of, right, well, I'm not just going to ferry them back and forth. I'm going to be involved in this, and you know, that's just it's remarkable. Her strength in it is absolutely remarkable.
It is, and look, maybe I'm looking for patterns here, but you do then see that her son is open to coaching and taking risks and pushing himself to be the absolute best, as if he's kind of driven somehow by her drive to keep this going. And like, we started the show tonight by talking about how easy it is for everybody to go, oh, the Dubs have all the money and Limerick have JP's money, and then you forget that actually the level of commitment required to reach the level that they've got to isn't actually just based on money at all. It's based on a drive and collective intelligence and all sorts of things, that this generational group must be seen as a generational group. Like Ger Hegarty saying that he wouldn't do things Garrod does, that he just wouldn't. I couldn't do those, you know. Like Quaid's evolution and like his relationship with Chrissy O'Connor, and even the interlude with Scahill in the book is interesting too. Like, we all know how mad Scahill is for making sure that he's the absolute possibly best that he can be. And he's like, I kind of had grudging respect / I was almost glad for him when he won its honour.
Yeah.
You know, like I'd love to have heard the conversation between the three of them in the Players' Lounge after the All-Ireland final. It would have been fairly sensational. But like, this group is an amalgamation of the death by 1,000 cuts that the county has suffered, and the rising up of that, like the swell of hope. And I don't think they're going to go away because of that. I think that there's, like, you know, they weren't happy with just the one All-Ireland. They weren't happy then getting beaten in an All-Ireland semi-final where they felt a sense of injustice, and they've come back stronger and more ferocious. And I do think history matters to them. I do think that they're playing for that, and I think they've got a sense of that.
Absolutely. And I think more important still is I think it's now it's hard to say whether they've elevated themselves into a 4 obviously, the roll of honour is a lot more. It would suggest, Tipperary, Cork and Kilkenny are still a mile away from everyone else in terms of All Ireland's won. I suppose the real measure of the success of everything will be if in 10, 20 years' time Limerick are elevated into that elite, and it's a case of that almost the same strangeness in Kilkenny where there's always generational players coming through, where you go from Carey to Shefflin to Reid, and it's not a given, but at the same time it is kind of a given. There'll be someone there and someone else comes through, and now you have this situation where if you're talking about the one generational, the fact Limerick could go last year and win an All Ireland
without Keane Lynch,
you're like, okay, they're not reliant. And then now look, if John Kiley goes, if that management team and Paul Kinnerk and everything else is broken up, and we'll see what happens then. They're probably intangibles that are harder to replace. But I think if they keep going with what they're doing, they'll still keep producing the players.
Well, I guess that's the point, that the processes are in place. Now, they have to continue. You still have to get the volunteers to come out on the Saturday and Sunday morning in the clubs, and then also, picking the right players through. But there is also that balance that we spoke about briefly between players wanting to play with their clubs at 14, 15, 16 and not having the hothouse of and the pressure of being an inter-county player. But I guess, they'll continue to be drawn. Well, I made the analogy with the Leinster school system. It's like that's a perfect thing for rugby in Leinster, and it works brilliantly for them. So I don't think they're going away as a county, but I do think that we shouldn't in any way underestimate the glut of good quality players that came through at the same time. That's not something that happens all the time. That's slightly generational. Like, what Hegarty did in the All-Ireland final, like I watched the game for the end of year stuff. That's a player in the zone in the biggest day, from the first second to the last second, literally from the first second to the last second. He is in a zone that is, I don't remember an individual performance as amazing, as gifted, and like, okay, so nobody's marking him, but nobody's marking him because he can't get near him. He's just ghosting into space, like, or he's brutalising you with his physical strength or his nimbleness, like. So they've got several of those. They actually have several of those at the same time.
Yeah, maybe but it is, and it's a little bit, I suppose, what we think back now. When you think back to, if you think Kilkenny 09, 10, 11, you're like, just pick a random front six there and just look at the names who are in there.
Yeah.
Like, it's a staggering type of thing. Or look at the back line, look who's there. All these kind of guys who are, so maybe it's that, and maybe that happens. Maybe you don't have the same glut of players through every year, but at the same token, most of them are still in their mid to late 20s.
Oh yeah, they're not done. They're going to wrap up plenty more. Look, it's a great book.
Thank you.
You must be happy with it.
It's nice to have it. It's nice to have done it. In terms of, I can't. There's not much I can say in terms of judging it.
Go for it. It's good. It's great.
I hope anyone buy it, even if you don't read it. Buy it.
We didn't talk about Tom Ryan. We don't have time. But like, Jesus Christ, buy the book for the Tom Ryan piece.
Tom Ryan. He was one of the people who were there at the launch night, actually, and it just steals the show. He's just larger than life, and I don't know if Maverick does him justice, but it's that kind of
Owen Sheehan went down to interview him.
Of course, yeah.
For the pre-All Ireland this year, and he just gave Owen an earful of that. You lads never put me on. Why are you not putting me on? I'm like really good at this. I'm a really brilliant pundit, essentially, was what he was saying. And in the book, he's like, yeah, people wind down the window and go, you don't have a clue what you're writing about, but most people telling you you're great.
It's great.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. And like,
yeah.
The politics in that are sensational, like absolutely sensational. The 20 questions that they print out for him, I'm not going to go into them because you definitely have to get into that in the book. It's called A Biography in 9 Lives, Limerick, Arthur James O'D. A towering work. Buy it for Christmas. Buy it for yourself. Get busy reading it. Congratulations.
Thank you.